I'd like to tell our listeners this morning about this new show called The New American Review here on KHQN, and a little bit about our guest, Mr. John F. McManus. Did you read that information on his biography?
Oh, I did. It sounds like he's had an interesting past, an interesting entrance into the John Birch Society.
And we've got this show regarding the JBS, John Birch Society, and their magazine that they publish is called The New American, and this is the New American Review. And I think you folks are going to be real surprised at what we discover when we interview John. The JBS, the John Birch Society, was formed in 1958 by Mr. Robert Welch, and it takes the name from the legendary World War II Army Captain John Birch, and he really was a hero. His family posthumously agreed to allow the society to be called after his name, and he was a many times decorated war hero. And 10 days after the end of the war, he was summarily executed by the Chinese. That fact was covered up for several years until the family hired a private investigator and finally found some way of getting him exonerated and let the people know. And that affected Mr. John Welch so much that he said, hey, what's going on with this government? They would cover up that story about a war hero. So he started the organization, and the goal, overall goal, has never been altered in 50-plus years of their existence, and that has always been to create a sufficient understanding amongst the American people about both their country and their enemies so that they can protect their freedoms and ensure the Constitution's continuation and the nation's independence. So that is a little bit about the JBS and the New American Review. You can find that. You actually have to type in thenewamerican.com, thenewamerican.com, and you will find some of the most reliable information that you've ever seen on thenewamerican.com. And it is a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. Now, do you have some information on Mr. John F. McManus? He has been the president for many years. He's been with the society for since 1966, and he's also the publisher of the New American magazine.
Now, we're going to have this show every Monday morning at 8 a.m.
That's right.
Regular as clockwork, and this brilliant, innovative program features this nationally prominent man, president of JBS, purveyor of the New American magazine. Listen as we discuss world and U.S. news, the economy, science, technology, cultural, politics, and what's really going on behind the scenes with our government.
Okay. Now, John, can you hear us?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, well, that's good. We got you in now. They fixed the connection, and our engineer was good enough to find what the problem was, and it was an unplugged connection. So, John, why don't you introduce yourselves a little bit more than we have, and we're sorry we got on a little bit late with you. We're having technicalities. We're not on our main stage. We're actually on a stage downstairs, and they're building a set upstairs on the main level at the main cyclorama, and they're shooting a movie all week long there. So there's a big set built on the stage, and they've colored the cyclorama from white to green for the chroma key green. But we're connecting with you in Boston this morning, John. And tell us a little bit more about yourself. You've been with the society since 1966, and you're one of the official spokespersons for the society. You're also the publisher of the magazine.
That's correct. I actually joined the society in 1964, and in 1966 they asked me to take a staff position, and I did. So it won't be too long before I'll have my 50th anniversary working for the John Birch Society.
Well, that is absolutely amazing. I'd love to hear a whole bunch about that story. But you are the president of the John Birch Society, and
that's true. And I tell people that if you hang around long enough, sometimes they make you president. I became president in 1991.
In 91.
A little little of my personal background. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, and a graduate of Holy Cross College, at which time I took a commission in the United States Marine Corps, served for 3 years on active duty with the Marine Corps. I never saw any combat, but I guess I could say I was ready if it came.
Semper Fi, John. This is another former Marine, Orion Marler.
Orion is our cohort here, and he also is a Marine. That's wonderful. We got 30 seconds, but I would like to at least address a little bit about the new Online Freedom Index, so our listeners can know what it is and where to find it. And good morning, and welcome back to KHQN Radio 1480 here in Utah. And we are so fortunate to have the maiden broadcast today of the New American Review with President John F. McManus, a very well-known figure. I've known him for years. I've listened to him broadcast on other programs, and also I've listened to him give speeches and addresses in several states. John, we're just so pleased and happy to have you here with us on the air for your own show. And this is the New American Review. This is their maiden voyage. And, John, just before the break, we were talking about the Online Freedom Index and the cumulative scores of the congressmen and senators. Now, I've relied on that information for years. I've sent emails and so forth and asking about their record and their voting record and how it affects us and our rights and our Constitution. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Online Freedom Index, how it came about, how people can find it and view it?
Well, twice a year, our magazine, The New American, publishes what we call the Freedom Index, excuse me, and it rates congressmen on their adherence to their oath to the Constitution, whether they supported the Constitution and its limitations on government, or whether they voted more government than dangerous proposals for the country. So twice a year we rate them on 10 issues, and every member of the House, all 435, and all 100 senators are rated. So anybody anywhere in the country can go to this index and look up their own senators and their own congressman and find out how he's doing and whether or not he's being faithful to the purpose that he was sent there. We have recently introduced an ability to go back and to look at not just the current situation regarding a congressman or a senator, but to go back over recent history and check what he's been doing over the recent years. Now, the way to do that is to go to the newamerican.com /Freedom Index and another /.
Okay, so let me repeat that. Let me repeat that, John, because if you type in just newamerican.com, it's not your website. You have to type in thenewamerican.com.
Yeah, you have to put the word "the" first, and it's all one word. The New American, all one word.
Yes.
.com /Freedom Index and another /. Or you can simply click on Voting Index in the bar at the top of the newamerican.com website. So what has happened here is over the nation, people have gone to the town meetings of the local representatives who go to Washington or the senator and asked him questions about his voting record. Well, some of these congressmen and some of these senators don't like that. They don't want people to know how they're voting. They just come back and tell them that they're doing a wonderful job and please keep supporting me and send me money so I can get reelected and so on. But here's the nitty-gritty, as we call it. Here are the results of their performance in Washington, and nobody can challenge it. It's taken from the Congressional Record and from Congressional Quarterly and so forth. We describe each of the votes that have been taken, and we give a plus for somebody who is on the right side of the Constitution regarding that, or we give him a minus if he's opposed to it. Votes in this particular Freedom Index that just came out had the rating of every congressman and senators on debt limit increase and on the minimum wage measure. Of course, the United States Congress should not be setting a minimum wage for anybody. There's another vote on repealing Obamacare. There's one on whether or not to go ahead with the Keystone pipeline that will take a lot of the oil and gas resources from Canada and send them the oil anyhow, send it to Texas for refining and then for use to make our country much more independent in the vital role of energy supplies. Another vote on illegal immigration. And then we go to the Senate. The votes are not exactly the same, but they're quite frequently the same. And we see that the senators, a lot of them, as you've mentioned, get a total zero. They never supported the Constitution.
Now, wouldn't it be nice if there was some repercussions for their voting record? They took an oath to defend and protect the Constitution. They took that oath. They raised their right hand and they put their left hand on the Bible, and they swore that they would protect the Constitution, and support it. Now,
when they take that oath, they don't each have a Bible in front of them, but it's just the same thing. They do it as a group. Congress will meet every second year. The House meets, and the Senate also, and they're asked to swear an oath to defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Sometimes they forget that part of it. They think that the oath is only something to do with going to war, but it isn't. It's got a lot. Now, let me mention this: that it's quite obvious in anybody who knows the Constitution and its limitations on government, that person would know that if the federal government were adhering to the Constitution of the United States, the cost of the federal government would be 20%, and the number of employees in the federal government would be 20% its current size.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, and that's that's easily demonstrable. I had a funny thing happen to me. I was in Montana not too long ago speaking, and I made that claim during my speech. And after the speech was over, a fellow came up to me, and he, great big guy, he's almost twice my size. And he looked down at me, and he says, "You said 20%. How about 5?" And I said, okay, 5.
He might be right.
Now, if the Constitution were fully enforced, there would be no federal involvement in education, in housing. There would be no food stamp programs. There would be no
environment
under wars. There would be no involvement in all kinds of international entanglements that we shouldn't be involved in, and so on. So the Constitution still stands, and we're great protectors of the Constitution. And we'd like to have more Americans become aware of that, and then, of course, hold their congressmen and their 2 senators, hold their feet to the fire.
Well, and this is kind of off subject, a little bit of a sidebar, but how in the world does our Supreme Court judge that Obamacare is constitutional? I'd like to have that demonstrated to me a little bit better than it has been.
Well, me too. The Supreme Court is a good portion of the problem. But, I've talked to several congressmen about this, and they've actually looked surprised. They didn't know that the House of Representatives can limit the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. In other words, if Congress would get together, Congress could say, all right, henceforth, the Supreme Court shall have nothing to say about education. Henceforth, the Supreme Court shall have nothing to say about the health of the American people and a health program. Well, that's Article 3, Section 2, that the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction. The Congress says, in all other cases, the Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction, both as to law and to fact, with such exceptions and under such regulations as the Congress shall make. Now, you tell that to a congressman, you have the ability to limit the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, and he'll look at you and say, I do? if he's honest.
Well, on the other side of that too, do they not also control the purse strings of the country? Can't since the House of Representatives decides what the budget is, can't they just withhold budget for some of these unconstitutional items and just kill them through lack of funds?
That's correct. Article, what is it? Article 3. That same article that the Congress is given the power to. Well, it's not just the Congress; it's the House. The House has the power.
Yeah, the House. Yep.
All bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House. And if the House will not originate a bill to fund Obamacare, to fund foreign aid, to fund this, to fund that, that's it. There's nothing the Senate, the President, the Supreme Court, or the New York Times can do about it. That power is there, and a lot of congressmen don't know that either.
Well,
what they know is what they need to get reelected, and of course they're relying on the lack of information to the American people.
It's amazing to me how little they do know, and that they do this with impunity. What is the question that we are asked here on the station more than probably any other question by people who call us on the phone? And by the way, if you have any questions here this morning for John F. McManus, president of the JBS, and he is also the publisher of the New American magazine. If you want to talk to John or have any questions or comments, our 800 number is 800-776-1913. That's 1-800-776-1913. Of course, 1913 was a bad year, wasn't it, John?
Well, that's interesting. I caught that when you first mentioned it. 1913 was a real turning point for the United States of America. 3 very important things happened in 1913, all bad. The first was that there was an amendment to the Constitution saying that senators should be chosen by a direct election of the people. Prior to that, the state legislature had the power to name a senator and to send him to Washington and to tell him that his main purpose in being there was to protect the rights of the states against the federal government. Well, after the amendment was passed in 1913, then the senators became just like congressmen, just like the members of the House. And they weren't representing the states anymore, and the state power continued to decline, and the federal power continued to grow. Well, that was the first of the things that happened in 1913. The second was the passage of an income tax. You can get a kick out of reading the debates back in that period. Somebody said, well, when we pass this, let's make sure we limit it to 5% of income. And the response was, no, don't put on 5% income as a limit because that will mean they'll go to the 5%. So they didn't put any percentage on it. Now it's 55, 30, 40%.
Well, let's continue this conversation after the break, John. That's interesting information. We're here on the New American Review right here on KHQN 1480 and streaming also worldwide. Welcome back to our show this morning. This is our maiden voyage with the New American Review right here on KHQN 1480, and we're streaming to you live worldwide, and we're also streaming to you on Google Hangouts. That's the new social media where you can hear us, and you can also see us on Ustream, or you can catch us on YouTube. Now, folks, let me just say that if we've got this morning here President John F. McManus with us, and if you want to give us your contact information, John, how do they send you people some, if they send an email or a question, how do they contact you?
Well, they contact me by just J. McManus, McManus, at jbs.org. J. McManus at jbs.org.
Okay, so that's the contact information. Go ahead.
All right, I'm going to be with you from week to week, but I have to say I had an engagement already arranged before we got into arranging this for next Monday, so I can't be with you next Monday, but I can the week after that, and then subsequent weeks. And
that's good to know that. Now, I know that the gentleman who's in charge of your publicity there, Bill, he said that you might have someone to be able to cover for you, Greg or someone, I'm not sure, but maybe we can talk about that, later on. If you want to listen to this show or watch it, you can go to our website. It's utahtalkradio.com. That's utahtalkradio.com. And on the upper left-hand side, there is a little microphone to listen live, or there's a little camera that said watch live, and you can press on either one of those, and they will take you either to the video or the audio stream. We were talking through the break. Now, those of you with us on television were able to hear what happened in 1913, and three terrible things that directly altered our freedoms and what we are about here in this country. And we are seeing the rights go from local to from the bottom and going to the top, rather than the way it was intended, to that any right that wasn't already established in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights stayed in the hands, the control stayed in the hands of the state or the people. And we've seen just the opposite, haven't we, John?
Absolutely. More power to Washington all the time. More power, more taxation, more inflation, which is a hidden tax on people. It just continues to grow, and we now have undeclared wars. We have federal involvement in many, many areas that it has no constitutional authorization to be involved in. And it's got to stop, because if it doesn't stop, it's going to be total government.
Well,
the end of freedom.
And for you who are just joining us, we're here on KHQN 1480, and we're with the New American Review with the President John F. McManus. I'm your host, Paul Jensen, and we've got our host here, Orion Marler. Orion, it's good to have you with us this morning as well.
Well, it's good to be here, and I have a question for John later on.
Oh, you can go ahead with that if you like.
Well, I just wondered if the John Birch Society has any contact or help from the Tea Party movement.
Well, the Tea Party movement is separate, but a lot of our members across the country have helped to start the Tea Party in their community. Sometimes the leadership of a Tea Party is being accomplished by a member of the John Birch Society.
Okay.
The goals of the Tea Party, in general, are the same goals we have, and that's less government, more responsibility, and with God's help, a better world. There are some Tea Parties, unfortunately, that have been led by individuals who are simply trying to establish a political base for themselves, and therefore they don't want to have any cooperation or any contact with other groups. They just want to be the king in their own little castle, I guess you could say. But generally speaking, the Tea Party movement has been a plus. Sometimes we say it's people trying to reinvent the wheel, but anyway, we're glad to see people off the couch and out doing something to try to save their country.
Well, that's got to be discouraging from you from the beginning, is that you're putting this message out of less government and adhering to our Constitution and more personal responsibility and less intrusion. And yet, how often do you I've thought of this many times through the years. How often do you get discouraged up there and say, how much longer can we continue to tell you people that you need to be involved in your country, and you need to be involved in politics and where this country's going? It just surprises me, but I've often wondered, well, maybe you are get discouraged at times up there.
Well, no, we don't allow that word in our vocabulary.
Okay, good.
Discouragement is the work of the devil, in my view.
All right.
Over the years, the John Birch Society has had many victories. Small ones. Small ones. Sometimes, occasionally, a large victory.
Well, I actually have that for a future show. I've gone to your victory page on your website, and if people want to see that. But I was actually I was thinking of doing that next week, but I'm going to wait until you get back in town, and I would like to go over some of the victories that you people are responsible for, and I think our listeners are going to be very interested in your successes.
There's been a move on to have a constitutional convention. Some people say, well, we ought to have a constitutional convention to prevent abortion or to balance the budget or something like this. And they don't seem to realize that a constitutional convention cannot be limited. And if you get a constitutional convention started today, the people who would be the delegates from the different states would end up destroying the Constitution.
Yep.
The only constitutional convention in the history of our country occurred when delegates were sent by the Articles of Confederation, and what they did in convention was abolish the Articles of Confederation, come out with a whole new constitution, and that precedent is something that we have to let people know about so that we don't have another constitutional convention.
To do away with the Constitution.
Yeah, if we want to amend the Constitution, let's go ahead and do it. Now, let me, if I could, explain to you in the words of somebody else what the John Birch Society is all about.
Okay.
And I'm going to quote a fellow named Thomas Jefferson. He said, I know no safe depository of the ultimate powers of the society but the people themselves. And if we think them not enlightened enough to exercise their control with a wholesome discretion, the remedy is not to take it from them, but to inform their discretion by education. Inform their discretion by education. The John Birch Society, if it's anything, is an educational institution. What we seek to do is to make Americans aware of the great heritage we have as Americans and to work to protect what we still have of our freedoms, and there are many, we still have many freedoms, and to ward off federal usurpation of power, federal takeover of power, and so on. That's what the John Birch Society was formed for. And Thomas Jefferson said, inform the people's discretion by education. He said, this is the true corrective of abuses of constitutional power. So we, I guess we discovered that quote of Jefferson after we started the John Birch Society in 1958, but it applies. It applies in his particular time in life. He died in 1826, by the way, after serving 8 years as our president. But the need to supply the general public with information is always something that's needed. And the John Birch Society has taken on that responsibility. We do it ourselves. We have no control over anybody. We just say, look, take a look at what we have to say, and you can compare that with what you're being told by others. Well, most of the time, you'll find it in quite sharp disagreement.
Well, and if people want to read more about this, you can go to thenewamerican.com. That's thenewamerican.com, and there are topics there, endless videos and educational material, exactly what you're talking about. You
can go to the jbs.org as well. It's another website.
That's right, jbs.org,
jbs.org, and then you can plug in to find the position of the John Birch Society on this topic, that topic, and some other topic, and so forth. They're all there, and it's very easy to access. And you can find out what the John Birch Society thinks about this proposal and that proposal, and so on.
In the last
people to do that.
In the last 2 minutes, I want to ask you a question, and I'll give you a little bit of comment about my opinion. And that is, back in the days of Eisenhower, the John Birch Society received a great deal of attention and opposition and name smearing and a big smear campaign to discredit you. And that was one reason that I was in favor of learning more, is why are they going so much out on a limb to discredit this organization? What is your response to that question when people ask you that?
Well, that's exactly how I got involved. In 1962, I was reading a national magazine, and it had an attack on Robert Welch, the founder of the John Birch Society. We wrote him a letter and thanked him for it, and they published my letter in the magazine. And because they did, some member of the Birch Society got a hold of me, and he said, are you basing your attitude about the society on what it has said or what others have said of it? Well, that was a good question. So I surprised the guy who wrote to me, and I got back to touch with him, and I said, I'll be happy to take a look at what you might offer me. And he sent me some material, and there began what I call a torturous reevaluation. I read a whole bunch of books, And in 1964, I said, I belong with this organization. I joined, and then they asked me to join the staff in 1966. So it's been quite a ride, and I certainly have no regrets. I've given practically all of my adult life to working for the John Birch Society, and I don't regret it one bit. I'm very proud and happy about what I've been able to accomplish.
Well, so are we. We're grateful to you for that step you took. This is the New American Review program on KHQN 1480. Now, we've got
There are negotiations going on right now to have the United States form a supposed trade partnership with the European Union. The European Union, of course, is 28 nations have given up their sovereignty to a powerful bureaucracy headquartered in Brussels in Belgium. And there are people in every one of those countries now that are regretting that their country got involved in it. So it's been a problem for Europe, and now our administration in Washington wants us to form a partnership with the European Union across the Atlantic. So we're saying, look, here's what the European Union has done to those countries. Let's not get in bed with them. And
I have a question about that, John. A couple of questions. First of all, folks, we're referring to an article in the New American Magazine, a headline story called "Transatlantic Two-Step," and basically what the position of the JBS is that we should say no to a U.S.-EU merger. So we should say no to an American and European merger. I spent some time in Europe. I lived there for a few years, and I can tell you I have many friends there who they fought against joining the EU, and they feel like they've lost their identity and their sovereignty. But what we're really talking about here is another step. Go ahead.
We're talking about foreign entanglement.
That's right.
It was Jeff who used that term to beware of foreign entanglements. George Washington had come out with the same notion, and he didn't use the term foreign entanglements, but he said the same thing. He said, let's have business dealings with everybody and relations with other countries at a minimum. And there's no reason to have a formal trade agreement which contains a lot more than trade with a country when you can have a businessman dealing with another businessman over in Europe or anyplace else without government involvement, except that there's fraud, and that's what should be going on. You go to the negotiations that are being conducted right now, and what you find is that, yes, they mention trade, but they mention an awful lot more beyond trade, and that would lead to the end of the sovereignty of the United States. We don't want that. I like to quote a man named Roman Herzog. He was Germany's president from 1994 to 1999. Germany had already joined the European Union. And he pointed out in 2007 that 84% of the legal acts in Germany stem from EU headquarters in Brussels.
Wow.
He lamented the question has to be raised as whether Germany can still unreservedly be called a parliamentary government. It's not. The dictates come down from Brussels. The people are forced into that. The European Union started out as a trade agreement, and then it grew into this, and it grew into that, and it grew into something else. And finally, in 2003, a book was published in England called The Great Deception, and it was about the European Union. The authors called the European Union a slow-motion coup d'etat, the most spectacular coup d'etat in history. A coup d'etat being the takeover of the state, a blow to the state.
Why are our leaders so anxious to try to unite us with this European Union and eventually, I guess, a new world order? Why are they so anxious to eliminate America's sovereignty and our freedoms and to try to lower our standards to that of Europe. I mean, it's proven. Look what's going on with Europe and their financial situation, their economics, the freedoms of the people, their work ethic. Why do we want to follow that? And why are they trying to force us into that?
Well, actually, we, the American people, don't want that, but the leaders of our country do. And this is the problem. The leaders of our country have already expressed themselves as being in favor of the New World Order. The president named Bush very prominently spoke out in favor of the New World Order, and the New World Order is world government and the loss of sovereignty and independence for our country.
Repeatedly, John, the socialistic system has proven itself to fail. Communism has failed utterly. It takes away all individual freedom and their initiative and many, many other things. Why are they continuing to push us towards something that has proven again and again to be a total failure?
Well, you have to use the word conspiracy at this point. A conspiracy being a plot by two or more in secrecy for an evil purpose. We became famous or infamous in the John Birch Society for saying that our leaders aren't stupid and they aren't ignorant. They're deliberate, and they're deliberately doing this to our country. So when you finally arrive at that deliberate, then you have to start using the word conspiracy. I like to quote a man who once said, "The first job of a conspiracy is to convince the world that there is no conspiracy." I thought that was a rather brilliant utterance.
Yes.
I remember when Khrushchev was banging his shoe on the table, and he told the American people that he didn't need to invade America, that we would implode on ourselves, and that we'd become.
Children will live under communism. You mentioned socialism, and a lot of people don't realize that the Communist Manifesto, written in 1848, is the Bible, so-called, of both communists and socialists. And we have to remember that the Soviet Union was the USSR, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. So you can lose your freedom to socialism just as much as you can lose it to some socialist who happens to call himself a communist.
Well,
I can recall very, very vibrantly being in studio on a radio show in San Francisco years ago, kind of a skittish host of this show, but as we went into this subject and that subject and so forth over an hour, he became more free and more open and more glad that he had me as his guest. And he finally ended the show by saying, "Well, quickly, tell me what's the difference between a communist and a socialist?" And I said, "A communist is a socialist in a hurry." And he about lost. He just doubled over. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. We'll see you again tomorrow." On his show. And that's true. A communist seizes control. A socialist gets you to seize it yourself. You get persuaded to vote for what the socialist wants, leading to total power by a socialist.
Well, now, wasn't it Thomas Jefferson that said that though he who wants he who will trade freedom for security will have neither? I mean, it was something like that. But
yeah, it wasn't Jefferson. That was Franklin.
Okay, Franklin. All right, got the wrong guy, but the right quote, I guess. Anyway,
hey, you go back to our founding fathers, and you'll find an awful lot of wisdom.
Yeah.
Well, one of our other talk show hosts was talking about in socialism, you suddenly run out of people with any money to pay for it.
That's right. Margaret Thatcher of England said that. The trouble with the socialists is that pretty soon you run out of the people's money.
That's right. Well, yeah. I have a real important question here for you, John, and it's what I started to say in the previous segment, and that is probably the most common question we get from our callers and from our listeners and on our emails is, what can we do about it? We feel so hopeless and so helpless. We know there's a problem and we feel like we can't do anything about it. What can we do?
Well, history is made by minorities, small minorities, for good or for bad. There's a minority making history for bad, and there's a minority that is gathering strength. The John Birch Society being the leader of it, in order to turn things around. Small groups of people will succeed. And the way to get our country back, I like to tell people, is get yourself a good member of the House of Representatives. All right? House of Representatives has the power of the purse and can stop almost anything. So we start with the House of Representatives. Now, how are you going to get a good member of the House of Representatives? You're going to get a good member by alerting the people to what the current member is doing, retain him if he's doing a good job, and get somebody new if he's not. And the way to find that out is to go to what we talked about at the beginning of the show. Go to the Freedom Index. And if you go to the Freedom Index, you'll be able to look at what your congressman is doing, not what he's saying. This is what he's doing. And you'll sometimes be surprised to find out that the man you thought was really a great American and a great constitutionalist is betraying you. That happens over and over again. So there's always hope. And I can say with all honesty that the forces of less government are gaining strength. They're gaining power. That the Obama administration should unilaterally delay the implementation of some parts of Obamacare, while members of the House of Representatives are talking about repealing the entire piece of legislation. That's good. And more people do that, more people get involved, and so forth. So we encourage people, go to our website, jbs.org, or if you want to go to the magazine, go The New American, all one word, .com. We're glad to hear from anybody, and you'll be pleased that there is such an organization as the John Birch Society to wake the town and tell the people before we lose our freedom.
You are the town crier, and we are appreciative of the information that you provide, and it's great to have you on this maiden show today, the New American Review. And again, folks, if you want to contact John, it's J. Manus, or J. McManus, and McManus is spelled McManus at jbs.org. Is that correct?
That's correct.
We're glad to have you here today, John. We look forward to hearing from you in 2 weeks, and hopefully you'll have a substitute next Monday. You're right here on KHQN, 1480 UtahTalkRadio.com.